Mind Management is a 36-issue series written and illustrated by Matt Kindt that was published by Dark Horse Comics between 2012 and 2015. Originally, it was intended to be 50 issues in total, but Matt Kindt trimmed his overall story to make it more concise. That's worth mentioning because it feels like 50 issues worth of material crammed into 36. And I don't mean to imply this story density is a negative thing, even though there's some material that is somewhat peripheral to the overall story. This extra material is like flavor text in a video game. It's not entirely necessary to read in order to grasp where the story goes, but it does fill out some of the empty spaces in the actual narrative, particularly the history of mind management and the people that established and worked for that organization. The story itself is about Maru Marlowe, a successful journalist who begins to investigate an incident aboard an airplane where everyone on board completely loses their memory. Not just about the flight, but about their entire lives. She discovers that the passenger manifest is missing the name of one person. This person was on the flight, and some of the other passengers have a vague memory of him, but there is otherwise no evidence of who this person was. Eventually, Maru tracks down this man, Henry Lyme, and he reveals that he once worked for a now disbanded organization called Mind Management. This organization primarily consisted of people with unusual psychic abilities, who influenced and transformed the world into what it is today. Their motives were pure, but, like all powerful entities, there was corruption and cover-ups, and many civilian casualties. This is why Mind Management was disbanded. The former agents of that organization were abruptly left out in the cold, and now they were being gathered together again by a woman known only as the Eraser. From there, the comic book begins to quickly move through a series of twists and turns as the two opposing factions of the former Mind Management organization begin to group together and confront one another. There is a lot of nuance to both the characters and the story itself. While there's a clear protagonist, Maru, and an equally clear antagonist, the Eraser, neither one of them is purely good or purely evil. They are shades of the spectrum, with equally questionable motives and differing perspectives that lead to their overall conflict. And who is ultimately right and who is ultimately wrong is somewhat dependent on the reader's perspective, since both characters represent the same overall goal. Obviously, everyone empathizes with Maru, since it is her story. But if you reverse the roles of antagonist and protagonist, your empathy could easily lie with the Eraser. That's what I mean by nuance. The hero of the story could be either one of these two characters. That's just great storytelling in my opinion. Mind Management is also filled with references to all manner of obscure things. Too many for me to list in a review, and I openly admit that a lot of them passed me by unnoticed until I perused the reader feedback. Which is perfectly fine since they're Easter eggs and not really necessary to the story itself. But I sometimes like it when an artist amuses themselves by dropping unrelated material in the background just because they can. One reason Mind Management works is it really feels like a secret document that is subliminally trying to make you believe in it. This element, as you might expect, is not overt in the slightest, but it is definitely there, picking at the edges of your subconscious. It's like the entire series is one story, but if you look closer and closer, another story will emerge. And maybe that story is more true than the one you think you understand. Now, I'm not going to remotely suggest that another story is layered underneath the actual story, but that is the atmosphere Matt Kindt gives to the overall presentation. It has that specific design, I suppose you could say, and that is a level of complexity you don't ordinarily see in a monthly comic book. The art itself is probably where some people might be less inclined to give this series a try. It looks hurried and dreamlike or impressionistic, rather than some form of stylized realism that's found in most mainstream comics. But, to me, comic book artwork has to be judged by one simple criteria. If it lacked dialogue, could I still follow the flow of the story? In that regard, Matt Kindt's artwork absolutely fits this criteria. That being said, I will admit that facial expressions were rather minimal, and they didn't convey much of an internal life. However, I also thought that wasn't necessarily a lack of artistic ability, but rather an extension of these characters, disguising themselves from one another. But that could be me justifying an artistic flaw, rather than an artistic choice. I mean, I'm predisposed to liking unique comic book styles, so it's probably a flaw that I'm trying to overlook. One thing I highly recommend is reading this series in bulk, but take your time as you do so. Don't burn through the issues just to see where the story goes. Take your time and enjoy the ride, because the story moves quickly in some places, and it's easy to lose the plot in those instances. I wouldn't say it requires your complete attention at all times, or you'll lose your place. But I will say if you deliberately pace yourself, you'll likely get more out of the reading experience. So if you like quirky conspiracy theory themed works, say that 3 times. Or you're looking for something that isn't all about saving the world one punch at a time, but you prefer some science fiction elements in your comic book reading, then I would definitely suggest Mind Management. Until next time.